Dr. David Clark on the subject.
This bill is one we have indicated we will support on the basis that it makes our tax system more robust. And that is its most basic and important function as a bill, in my view. So that becomes the overriding reason that we support the bill. We are, in this bill, of course, confirming the annual rates of taxation, which are the same taxation rates that were confirmed in the government's 2010 tax package, where 40% of the value of those tax changes went to the top 10% of earners, and the bottom 2% got just 20%. Sorry, the bottom 20% got just 2% of the value of those tax cuts, as they were called. And of course, it got swallowed up in GST at the time, as John Key broke his promise not to increase GST. So this is what we do in this bill. We confirm that 2010 tax package, and let's not forget that in doing that, we seem to be, under this government's stewardship, committing this country to further borrowing. This is a government sitting opposite us that have borrowed more money than the Muldoon government borrowed. This is the government that has created more debt for New Zealand than any other government in New Zealand history. And part of borrowing has been to fund these tax cuts. And they do blame us. The member is quite right. Although there is absolutely no evidence to support that claim, they blame us for the fact that they have borrowed and borrowed and borrowed to fund these tax cuts that they put through in the 2010 tax package, where all of the value went to the very top earners and the middle class missed out again. And they are working with this tax package to ensure that the in club, that their mates in the in club, a very small club I might add, are looked after into the future, and to make sure that Middle New Zealand sees none of the benefits of the economic gains. Of course, today we also heard more evidence coming out in recent days that shows that New Zealand's GDP is not growing per person. The only thing that is growing our GDP in the last year, basically, is immigration. So individuals are not better off. In fact, in many regions of New Zealand, real incomes, household incomes, are still lower than when they took office all those years ago. And New Zealanders know this to be true. They experience in their everyday lives. They know that the Kiwi dream is leaching away from them. They know that these tax changes that we're still here again confirming this year, again in this bill before us, are responsible for them being worse off over time, as that borrowing and these tax changes go to fund the very wealthiest 1% of New Zealanders to live the lifestyle that many people could only imagine in their wildest dreams. And most of New Zealand is missing out. Most of New Zealand is missing out under this government. It has a terrible record. It's actually got the worst economic record of any government in the last 50 years. We know for certain no one has borrowed more. We know that no one has driven inequalities in quite the way they are being driven now, as we have the lowest home ownership rate in 60 years. The OECD, of course, put out a report about a year ago saying that inequalities in New Zealand had acted as a major handbrake on our economy. It is about 15% smaller as a result of inequalities than it would have been otherwise. And the tax rates in this bill that we are affirming this evening are a part of that picture. This is a government that just does not seem to care for the middle classes. They are really only concerned with that very tight in club, that very tight cabinet club, and their well-being, and that is coming at the expense of New Zealanders, of ordinary New Zealanders, who used to once dream of owning their own home. It wasn't such an unreasonable thing to dream of. When I was growing up as a kid, I think most people imagined they would own their own home. Now I see a large number of my peers saying it will never happen for them. People in my age group saying it will never happen for them because housing has got so out of control. And we think, particularly in Auckland, where I think the average house price is now around $930,000 and will soon hit $1 million for the average house, one of the most expensive housing markets in the world, that something is out of whack. It is the most, my colleague in the Green Party says, the most expensive. And this is where we're heading to as a country. This is not the New Zealand that we should have. This is not the New Zealand that we should have. And yet, in this bill, we are once again affirming those tax rates. And we know why inequality is bad for us. We know that when kids go to school hungry, they don't learn as well. It's not rocket science. We know that if they go to school without shoes on, with raincoats, they get preventable illnesses, they probably feel the world's against them. And it probably is, actually. They're more likely to end up in the prison system. They're more likely to be unable to make the contribution they otherwise could make as a result of inequalities. And we know that inequalities are bad for us when people are so desperate to earn money because they've grown up in poverty that they throw every other care aside, other societal cares. Think of the person who goes out to become a wealthy stockbroker exploiting loopholes in financial systems in order to make sure that they can provide for the next generation because they grew up in poverty. That person might well have been better as a neurosurgeon. They are choosing to use their talents out of desperation when they live in an unequal society. And we know that less equal societies don't invest in infrastructure in the same way that more equal societies do. And we see that in the United States. The state of many major highways is woeful compared to the major investment in places like China that are committed to public infrastructure. And we see China in the recent decades on the way up as they've invested in public infrastructure, and the United States struggling. These are meta trends. We know we all need hospitals and schools, and we need a taxation system that supports them. But the more our taxation system drives inequality, the greater the burden on those particular systems and the greater the cost of running them effectively. We need a more equal society, and this government just doesn't care. It seems determined to focus on making sure the 1%, the very wealthiest of the wealthy, are looked after at the expense of those in the middle. At the expense of those in the middle. And we know that when we have a fairer society, everyone feels like they're included. Everyone feels like they have a role to play. Everyone feels like they can give of their best and that it will be valued. And that makes for a wealthier, more prosperous and happy society. But this government opposite seems determined to focus only on making sure the 1% are better off. They are focused only on some superficial targets around surplus. We've seen the Minister of Finance deliver his first surplus after 7 years of government. He's been promising it for 2 elections, finally delivered one, and now he's saying he can't do it again. The last Labor government delivered 9 surpluses in a row. 0 net debt at the end of the day. The last Labor government had a very responsible fiscal position. This one has borrowed more than any other government in New Zealand history. More than any other government in New Zealand history, and that member knows it, and he is embarrassed. And well, he might be, because this government has a shameful economic record, a shameful economic record. They have failed to recover after the financial crisis. They were gifted 0 net debt. They said, Bill English said, that's the day, the rainy day we've been saving for, that the Labor Party had saved for. They've spent that money through the global financial crisis. Nobody would say that was wrong initially, but since then, they could have got New Zealand back on track. They could have had a plan. Instead of going from one dairy price bubble to the next, blaming the farmers when things went wrong, like that government does, they could have set about diversifying the economy, creating a plan, creating a tax structure that incentivised research and development properly rather than tinkering around the edges to protect entrenched interests, which is their way of doing things. They could have created an economy that was humming, that was really in New Zealand's interests. And we could have been debating a tax bill that had much more proactive measures in it to create a better society, to create a better country and a wealthier, more prosperous New Zealand where people actually could afford to own their own homes, where they weren't worried about non-resident foreign buyers bidding up the market so that the whole market was unaffordable in Auckland for the average Kiwi to buy a home in. This is not the New Zealand we all dream of. This is not the Kiwi dream. This government has lost touch with the aspirations of New Zealand. They were there, spoke to those aspirations when they came in, but now they look jaded, now they look tired, they've given up on ordinary middle New Zealand, and they are now only looking to the aspirations of the 1% in the hope that they can fund another campaign, cling to power for another term, and ram through more bills that preserve the status quo and protect the interests that they have and not the interests of ordinary middle New Zealand.